Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, an almanac of garden history, literature, and small botanical joys. I'm Jennifer Ebling, and today is March 20th. Today is the vernal equinox, the moment when light and dark stand equal in a single day. Outside, the snow still lingers at the fence line, but the sun hangs higher now. In the garden, this is a threshold day. Seeds are still asleep. Ideas are still forming. There's so much waiting and so much potential. Today holds what lies dormant and what happens when it's finally given room to grow. Here's today's garden history. It was on this day in 1818 that the Danish botanist and garden builder Johan Martin Christian Lange was born. Johan devoted his life to bringing order to the plant world, not to tame it, but to understand it. As director of the Copenhagen Botanical Garden, Johan helped guide the garden's move to its present home, reimagining how plants could be gathered, studied, and shared. Under his care, extraordinary glasshouses rose, vast structures of iron and light, modeled after London's Crystal Palace. They held warmth against the northern cold and made room for plants far beyond Denmark, living collections that the public could finally walk through, see up close, and learn from. Johan was also the final editor of Flora Danica, one of the most ambitious botanical projects ever undertaken. Hundreds of plates, thousands of plants, each rendered with patience and precision. It was not a book meant to impress. It was meant to be used so that when a plant was named, that name could be trusted. For Johan, classification was always a form of care, a way of saying, to know a plant well is the beginning of respect. And it was on this day in 1885 that the British poet and garden writer Muriel Stuart was born. Muriel began her life as a poet. She was praised by the English novelist and poet Thomas Hardy, who admired her fierce modern voice. But over time, Muriel's attention shifted from language to soil, from public acclaim to private tending. After the birth of her children, Muriel turned toward gardening and toward a different kind of writing. In books like Gardener's Nightcap, Muriel wrote not to instruct, but to settle the reader. She wrote, "There is an hour just before dark when the garden resents interference. Its work, no less than the gardener's, is done. Do not meddle with the garden at that hour. It demands, as all living creatures demand, a time of silence." Muriel believed that the garden had moods, needs, and limits. Do not meddle, she advised. Proof that even as she gardened, Muriel never lost her poet's sense of wonder. And nowhere is that clearer than in her writing about seeds. Here's Muriel's poem called The Seed Shop. Here in a quiet and dusty room they lie, faded as crumbling stone or shifting sand, forlorn as ashes, shriveled, scentless, dry, meadows and gardens running through my hand. In this brown husk, a dale of hawthorn dreams, a cedar in this narrow cell is thrust, that will drink deeply of a century's streams. These lilies shall make summer on my dust. Here in their safe and simple house of death, sealed in their shells, a million roses leap. Here I can blow a garden with my breath, and in my hand a forest lies asleep. Muriel adored seeds, those small, unassuming vessels of astonishing possibility, waiting quietly in packets, drawers, and pockets. In today's Unearthed Words, we hear a poem from the Norwegian playwright Henrik Ibsen, born on this day in 1828. Henrik lived and wrote in Norway, a country shaped by long winters, steep valleys, and short growing seasons along the North Sea coast. Henrik often used gardens and landscapes as moral terrain, places where ideas about freedom, beauty, and control could quietly play out. In his poem, Wildflowers and Hothouse Plants, flowers stand in for women. The hothouse plants are trained, contained, admired for their polish, raised to behave, to bloom on schedule, and to please. The wildflowers, by contrast, grow without permission. They breathe open air, they carry scent, season, and unpredictability. By the end of the poem, Henrik leaves no doubt where his allegiance lies. He ends the poem this way: "They sleep by rule, and by rule they wake. Each tendril is taught its duties. Were I worldly wise, yes, my choice I'd make from our stock of average beauties. For worldly wisdom, what do I care? I'm sick of its prating murmurs. She breathes of the field and the open air, and the fragrance of 16 summers." Some beauty cannot live under glass. The garden has always known this. And for Henrik Ibsen, wild beauty wins. Always. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, A Year at Great Dixter by Christopher Lloyd. It's British Gardens Week here on The Daily Gardener, which means all the book recommendations for this week feature books devoted to the landscapes, writers, and garden traditions of Britain. Christopher walks us through a year in his garden at Great Dixter, month by month, plant by plant, failure by failure. Christo believed succession planting was an art, that gardens should change constantly, never settling into obedience. He ripped out rose gardens, planted tropicals when tradition said no, trusted his eye more than convention. What makes this book endure is not just the instruction, but the voice. Opinionated, curious, unapologetically alive. Christo reminds us that a garden is not a rule book. It's a conversation, one shaped by risk, response, and return. And finally, here's something sweet to ignite the little botanic spark in your heart. It was on this day in 2022 that the Chilean botanist and forest defender Adriana Hoffman died at the age of 82. As a child, Adriana was rarely without flowers in her hands. She spent her life walking through deserts, forests, and mountains across Chile along the long spine of South America's western edge. Adriana learned the names and habits of plants few others noticed, and later she crossed the country by foot and by jeep, documenting species, sketching landscapes, and listening closely to the land itself. Adriana wrote books, she taught, she defended forests when few others would. Near the end of her life, Adriana was asked what nature had given her after all those years. She answered with a single word: love. As we close the show today, remember, there are days when light and dark stand even, only for a moment. Morning and evening touch hands, and then the balance begins to lean. The light does not wait. It keeps a little more of the day. The afternoon opens, the shadows shorten. In the garden, the change is already underway. The soil is softening, the cold is loosening its hold. What was waiting begins to stir. This is how the season turns, not carefully, but surely. The balance breaks toward growth, toward lengthening days, toward return. Tomorrow, it begins. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life. Garden every day.